According to his usual practice, he would sleep until tomorrow morning. Passing by a tanghulu stall, Li Yi bought a few skewers of assorted tanghulu, gave one each to Xuanhuan, Yongning and proud Lolita, turned his head to look at Mississippi Lu, asked, "Want one?" "Childish." Mississippi Lu glanced at him, expressed her disdain and picked a bunch of grapes. There were not many opportunities for a family to come out together like this, especially when it was such a lively occasion. It only happened 3 or 4 times a year. Just as he told them to be careful when eating the candied hawthorn and not to hurt themselves, an extremely rough voice came from behind. "Get out of the way, get out of the way. The capital Yamen is arresting a criminal of the imperial court. Get out of the way, all of you, get out of the way." Several constables in Yamen uniform rushed over from behind. Their movements were extremely rough, and many people were pushed down or pushed down by them, but they could only curse their bad luck and didn't dare to show it. A man who looked like a constable was pressed down on his shoulder before he could push Li Yi. The constable frowned and scolded, "Bastard, your eyes are on your buttocks. Can't you see that the constables are handling a case? Get out of the way, can you bear the responsibility if you make a mistake?" As soon as he finished speaking, he felt something hard pressed against his waist. "Are your dog eyes blind?" Then a soft and feminine voice reached his ears. For them, working for the Yamen, no matter if it was a man's or a woman's voice, they had nothing to fear. But this kind of voice that was neither male nor female was the most terrifying. If they heard this kind of voice on the street, it meant that there was some important person in the palace here. And no matter who it was in the palace, it was not someone they, including their prefectural magistrate, could afford to offend. The constable shivered and immediately said, "Forgive me, forgive me. We are only following the imperial edict to arrest a criminal of the imperial court. We didn't mean to alarm." The person in the dark did not speak again. The constable felt the hard thing on his waist disappear and sighed in relief. When he raised his head again, there was only a vast stream of people. A person behind him asked, "Boss, what do we do now?" He pointed to another path with some annoyance and said, "Go around there, a criminal of the imperial court?" Li Yi frowned. The flow of people in the capital during the night was the highest of the year, and it was also the time when trouble was most likely to occur. Tsing Shichen was muddle-headed. He actually chose this time to arrest a criminal of the imperial court? However, with Rui and Mississippi Lu as well as so many guards in the dark, there was no need to worry about the safety of the arrogant girl and the others. He was only puzzled for a moment before he was pulled to the side by the arrogant girl to look at a unique goldfish lantern. On the other side of the street, Xiao Chui hugged Zheng Zimo's arm and begged, "Miss, you are the best at guessing lanterns. Please guess another one." Zheng Zimo looked at the different lanterns hanging on her arms and said grumpily, "You already have so many. Sister Ruoqing guessed 2 for you just now. Can you still carry them?" Xiao Chui looked down and then handed 2 lanterns to Xiao Zhu behind her. She turned around and said with a smile, "Now I can carry them." Zheng Zimo gently pulled her ear and said, "Let's talk about it when we go back. How can we stroll around with so many lanterns in our hands?" "Oh." The servant girl lowered her head in disappointment and said softly. Then she seemed to have thought of something. She raised her head and said excitedly, "Miss, do you think we can meet Li tonight?" Zheng Zimo knocked on her head and said, "The capital is so big. How can you meet him just because you say so?" "Don't dream," the servant girl pouted. "But sometimes fate is so wonderful. Although the capital is big, as long as 2 people's hearts are the same." "Oh miss, if you hit Xiao Chui again she will become stupid," meowing pavilion. On the night of the first month, this kind of entertainment place had the most business. The beautiful woman had been shuttling upstairs and downstairs, entertaining all kinds of guests. Seeing someone walk in from the door, she immediately went up and said with a smile, "Oh, young Master Chu, you are finally here. Xuanhuan has been waiting for you tonight." She has already pushed away more than a dozen waves of people. Chu Ping was at a loss and said in disbelief, "Ah, Xuanhuan has been waiting for me up there?" "That's right." The beautiful woman smiled and said, "For the past few days Xuanhuan has been talking about how she is indebted to young master for saving her last time, but she is unable to repay you. She feels really guilty." Chu Ping was a little embarrassed and quickly waved his hand. "It was nothing. I believe that anyone with a bit of righteousness in their heart would not just stand by and watch." Seeing this, Cui Shixin shook his head slightly and pulled his sleeve. "Come here." Chu Ping was pulled to a corner and asked in confusion, "What?" "I said you are a bookworm, but you are not convinced." Cui Shixin looked at him and said helplessly, "Can't you see that Lady Xuanhuan has fallen for you?" Chu Ping was shocked. "Think about it, what is your identity? You are the eldest son of the Chu family, a man of striking appearance and great literary talent. What is her identity? She is just an entertainer. That day when she was bullied, who was the one who stood up for her? At that time she was at her weakest and most helpless. It was you who gave her hope and light. For a woman to fall in love with you because of this, isn't that very normal? Cui Shixin looked at him and slowly said, Lady Xuanhuan has never accepted a private invitation from anyone before. Why is it that she spends time alone with you every day? Do you think it's just because you saved her? You mean? Chu Ping looked at him in a daze and muttered, Lady Xuanhuan, she likes me? Cui Shixin patted his shoulder and said, Hurry up and go up. Don't let Lady Xuanhuan wait for too long. Brother, I can only help you this much. Chu Ping stood there in a daze for a long time before a happy expression gradually appeared on his face. He looked at Cui Shixin and said gratefully, Thank you for your advice, Cui Shixin. I will go up now. Seeing Chu Ping quickly walk up the stairs, Cui Shixin found a seat in the hall and sat down. He picked up a cup of green tea and gently swirled it. The corners of his mouth curled up as he softly murmured, That lady's body seems a bit weak. With Chu Ping's hobbies. I wonder if she can bear it. Somewhere on the street, a few bailiffs were sitting in front of a tea stall. One of them looked towards the wonderful sound pavilion. After a long time he turned his head and asked, Boss, it's about time, right? The leading bailiff said in a low voice, Wait a little longer, it's not time yet. Chapter 868. The streets of the capital of Xuanhuan were abnormally crowded. Although the surrounding guards had purposely created a relatively loose space in the middle, it was still very difficult to walk through. Yongning was too short and could only see the backs of others. Li Yi simply carried her up. The proud Lolita was already very tall. She had always felt that she was no longer a child like Yongning, but at this moment she was a little envious of her. The streets were mostly filled with lanterns and acrobatics. However, after watching too many of them, it became boring. The performances in the brothels were much more exciting. The group of people walked about half the street and entered a brothel. The brothel was still crowded, but it was orderly. Li Yi and the two young ladies followed behind them. It didn't matter which venue they entered. These performances in the brothel were nothing strange to him. However, this spacious hall seemed a little different. Looking over, on one side, there were young scholars gathered in groups of 3 to 5, whispering to each other. On the other side there were curtains. There were light voices coming from inside, and he could vaguely see the women behind the curtains. In between these young men and women, there was a long line of lanterns that separated them. On the other side there were some young people holding lanterns and writing something on them. The proud Lolita asked doubtfully, Sir, what are you doing? Li Yi also didn't know who thought of this new way of playing. He waved to a worker in the brothel and asked, What are you doing? The worker only felt that the young man in front of him looked familiar. After recalling, he shivered and hurriedly said, Greetings, young master. I'll call the manager over immediately. Li Yi waved his hand and said, There's no need. I'm just taking a look. What are they doing over there? The worker immediately replied, Those people on the left are all famous scholars in the capital. They write poems on the lanterns and hang them there. If the ladies behind the curtains take a fancy to them, they will send a servant to tie a sachet on the lanterns. Li Yi finally understood that this was simply another form of matchmaking. Back in the day he had experienced it himself. He had received countless scented sachets and love letters. If he did not remember wrongly, it was from an open-minded lady who had even stuffed a warm doo-doo into his arms. No wonder some of the scholars were in high spirits, while others looked unhappy. That was because some of the lanterns in the middle didn't have a single sachet on them, while others had a few hanging on them. Choosing a son-in-law wasn't rare in this era. If it was in the future, the lanterns would definitely not have poems but photos. Perhaps there would even be property certificates, car keys and passbooks. Xuanhuan watched as a servant girl came out from behind the curtains and hung her lady's sachets on the lanterns. She thought it was very interesting. She grabbed onto Li Yi's arm and said excitedly, Young master, why don't you also write a poem and hang it up? There will definitely be more sachets than all of them. In her heart, the young master was the most talented person. Otherwise, why would he be called the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom? If the young master put up a lantern there, it would definitely be the one with the most sachets. The arrogant Lolita wished for the world to be in chaos. She added fuel to the fire and said, That's right. Mister, why don't you write a poem and beat them all? It's best if you don't even give them a sachet. The two of them seemed to want to see such a scene. Their expressions were somewhat excited. They completely didn't notice that the scholars not far away had expressions of displeasure on their faces. Hee hee, since when did such an arrogant person appear in the capital? He won't even leave us a sachet. Who does he think he is? The #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom? Even the #1 scholar wouldn't dare to say such arrogant words. Some of the scholars not far away were feeling depressed. When they heard the words of the two young ladies, they felt ashamed and angry. However, they didn't want to argue with them. In a split second, the gazes on Li Yi increased. Li Yi knocked on the heads of the two of them and said, "Write whatever you want to write." Writing a poem also requires inspiration. It's not something that can be written just because you want to. There's nothing to see here, let's go. Rui and Lin Wanru went to the venue next door. There weren't any performances there, but there was an exhibition of women's clothing. It was the most popular style of women's clothing in the capital this year. Li Yi originally wanted to follow them, but the arrogant Lolita and Xuanhuan insisted on seeing who had the most sachets in the end. He could only accompany them there. What Xuanhuan wanted to see the most was the young master's poem. She rolled her eyes and walked over. She whispered, "Young master, you've written poems for Xuanhuan, for Miss and for Miss Zhang. You've written many poems for second Miss?" Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu. Mississippi Lu also looked over. "Forget it." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Other people's lanterns and sachets have other meanings. It's better if we don't disturb them." Mississippi Lu turned her head expressionlessly. In front of her, someone walked over. It was a scholar dressed in a scholarly robe. He looked rather refined. In his hand, he held a lantern that was obviously inscribed with words. He smiled and said, "Sorry to disturb you. I hope you don't take offense. It's just that when I saw you from afar, I was amazed and admired you. Suddenly, I was struck by inspiration and came up with a poem. This poem originated from you, so I wanted to give it to you." After this young scholar walked out from the crowd, a sigh came from behind the curtains. This young Master Zhou's literary talent was brilliant. He was very famous among the scholars in the capital. He was also a new imperial examination scholar. He was the best candidate for a son-in-law. There were already many people who had their eyes on him. But today, young Master Zhou actually gave the lantern with his poem inscribed on it to the young lady. This was the most direct expression of his feelings. What gift! Before Mississippi Lu could speak, Li Yi walked straight in front of her. He said to young Master Zhou, "You're willing to give it to her, but others aren't willing to accept it." He looked at Mississippi Lu and asked, "Isn't that right, Rui?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and asked, "Is that right?" Young Master Zhou saw this and was delighted. He looked at Li Yi and twitched the corner of his mouth. He said, "You're not this young lady. How do you know if she's happy or not? Why, if you can't give this lantern out, you won't allow others to give it out." The lanterns here were not just lanterns. If one wanted to give a lantern out, he must write his own poem on it. The scene of Li Yi's refusal made this young Master Zhou feel that this person was just not talented and could not write a suitable poem. Of course, if he really tried to look impressive at his own cost and randomly wrote a poem, then what awaited him would be even greater humiliation. Li Yi glanced at him indifferently. He had seen too many such clumsy provocations. He looked at Mississippi Lu and said, "Xuanhuan is right. I haven't given you any poem. If I give it to you now, we don't need his." Xuanhuan had already taken her favorite lantern with a smile. The proud Lolita grabbed a pen from the other side of the table. "If you want to give it or not, who cares?" Mississippi Lu said in disdain. Her eyes looked at him. Li Yi held the lantern with one hand and wrote on the blank space with the other. He quickly put down the pen and held the lantern with both hands. He passed it to Mississippi Lu and said, "Rui, this is for you." Young Master Zhou wanted to stretch his head out to look but was pressed back by Li Yi. At this moment, a manager from the brothel walked over and asked carefully, "Young master, do you want to hang this lantern over?" "No need." Li Yi waved his hand. He looked at them and said, "There's nothing interesting here. Let's go. Let's hang it." Mississippi Lu looked down and suddenly passed the lantern in her hand over. Although she was literate, she didn't know anything about poetry. However, she also wanted to see if the poem he gave her was good or not. Was it good to give to someone else? Chapter 869. "Let's not hang it up." Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu and said hesitantly. The manager had already explained the rules to him in detail. Once the lanterns were hung up, it meant that they had agreed to the rules. It was fine if there were no scented sachets, but if there was a lady who hung up her own scented sachet, the two of them would have to have dinner together. If there were more than one scented sachet, they would have to choose one. His house was already in a mess and there were many unresolved issues. There was no point in flirting with other ladies. Mississippi Lu looked at him and shook her head. It's all right. I have nothing better to do, so I'll just take a look. Before young Master Zhou could see what was written on the lantern, the manager of the brothel had already hung it up. He waved his hand to summon another waiter and handed over the lantern in his hand, saying, "Hang this up as well." Then he looked at Li Yi. It was obvious that he wanted to compete with Li Yi. Someone copied the poems on the two lanterns and sent them to the curtains. As for the candidates, according to the rules, their poems would not be revealed before the final result was revealed. What a mystery. I want to see how many scented sachets he can get. Even though I don't like Zhou, but he's just a nobody. He's overestimating himself. Every poem was recorded and sent into the curtains. Those who had yet to receive a scented sachet had already lost their chance. Those who had already received scented sachets, no matter how many of them there were, would not be embarrassed tonight. They were all waiting to watch the show. Of course, compared to this arrogant person who popped in halfway, they were still biased towards young Master Zhou from the bottom of their hearts. With the curtains blocking their view, they could only see the gist of it. However, they noticed that after the two poems were sent into the curtains, there was a commotion inside. Someone turned to look at young Master Zhou and clasped his hands, saying, "Looks like Brother Zhou really got a good piece of work today. It was just luck." Young Master Zhou was confident in his poems, but he still replied humbly. His actions allowed the crowd to understand that the man surnamed Zhou was truly going to shine brightly today. Very quickly, someone walked out from behind the curtains. It was a maid with a bun on her head. "That's from the Su family?" Someone recognized him at a glance. Another person said with a smile, "Miss Su has admired Brother Zhou for a long time. I'm afraid she's waiting for you to hang up her lamp today. That is because Miss Su thinks highly of me?" Young Master Zhou smiled lightly and said, "Miss Su is extremely talented. Actually, I also have some admiration for Miss Su." As soon as he finished speaking, a maidservant with her hair combed into a bun hung a fragrant sachet under a goldfish lantern. "Sir, there's one." The Tsundra Lolita shouted excitedly. She had just bought this goldfish with her husband. Mississippi Lu looked at him and then looked away. Young Master Zhou's expression was a little awkward. He coughed twice and covered it up very well. He said, "Hee, it seems that I have underestimated the people of the world." Someone comforted him. "Sigh, Brother Zhou, don't be discouraged. It's only one. Didn't Miss Su also fall in love with you? Look, isn't that girl from the Su family coming out? Miss Su is talented and beautiful." We also had a deep conversation. Young Master Zhou looked at the maidservant in emerald green clothes hanging the fragrant sachet under the goldfish and murmured, "Deep, deep conversation. Too. The Tsundra Lolita and Xuanhuan hugged each other and shouted. What kind of poem did he write?" Someone was stunned for a moment before revealing an extremely curious expression on his face. "That, Brother Zhou, perhaps these 2 times were just accidents." Someone stared at the curtain and said, "Look, another person came out." She walked to the side. She didn't choose that goldfish. That's strange. Why isn't she holding the fragrant sachet in her hands? Everyone's eyes widened as they watched a maidservant walk out from the curtain empty-handed. She walked past that goldfish, walked past young Master Zhou's lantern and came to the front of a lotus lantern. "It's Brother Fong. Congratulations, Brother Fong." Although this lotus lantern had been displayed long ago, it was a little strange to hang the fragrant sachet only now. However, as long as it wasn't that weird goldfish, it was fine. Everyone cupped their hands towards a young man in the crowd. That young man smiled and cupped his hands in return. "Thank you for letting me win." After a round of congratulations, they saw that the maiden walked to the front of the lotus lantern and took down the fragrant sachet under the lantern. Then she took 2 steps back and hung the fragrant sachet under the goldfish again. This works too? How can this be?" That young man with the surname Fong's expression froze. Looking at the lotus lantern that once again became empty, his expression gradually became sluggish. As for that young Master Zhou, he stood on the spot in a daze. The expression on his face was already indescribable. More and more people walked out from behind the curtain. Very quickly, the area below the goldfish was filled with fragrant sachets. Although not everyone hung the fragrant sachet under the goldfish, compared to the surrounding people, there was no need to compare. Those maidservants were afraid that they would fall behind. They huddled and shoved each other. The situation was starting to get out of control. It was to the extent that even the curtain had been lifted a little, and countless gazes were focused in a certain direction. At the same time, whispers could be heard from behind the curtain. "It's that young master. That young master is even more handsome than young Master Zhou. His poetry is also well written." Why haven't I seen it before? I wonder who he will choose today. Li only glanced in a certain direction and felt as though he was standing naked outside. When Mississippi Lu looked over, Li said innocently, I already said that I'm not pretending this time, but you just wouldn't listen. As he spoke, he grabbed the excited Sundra Lolita and Yongning and quickly walked out. Seeing him leave as though he was escaping, Mississippi Lu looked at the crowd not far away and a smile appeared on her lips. It seemed like he really wasn't being perfunctory. More than 10 scholars surrounded an old man and urged, Duke Song, what kind of poem did he write? Can you please evaluate it? The area around the lantern was completely surrounded. The only piece of paper with the poem was in the hands of this old man. The old man who was addressed as Duke Song stroked his beard and looked at the piece of paper in his hands. After looking at it for a long time, he mumbled, I can't evaluate it, I can't evaluate it. If I do, it would be superfluous. He looked outside the door and sighed. He is indeed the #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom. He lives up to his reputation. What? The #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom? Is Li? While the crowd was stunned, young Master Zhou's face was already flushed red. Not far away there were exclamations. Where's the lantern? That lantern is gone. It was here just now. Look for it quickly. Don't trample it. The brothel manager looked at the mess in the hall and revealed a bitter smile. How was he going to clean up this mess? Outside the door, Li saw Mississippi Lu walking out with the lantern. He looked at her and asked, How is it? It's all right. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, I've been searching for her in the crowd for thousands of times. But when I look back, she's still there in the dim light. What does this mean? Who are you looking for? I'm not looking for anyone. Li shook his head and pointed at the flickering lights in front of him. He said, I wrote it blindly. Look, the lights are waning like a dream. The person you like walks out from the flickering lights, and the two of them stare at each other in a daze. What a beautiful scene. Mississippi Lu's gaze followed the direction of his finger. A few figures walked out from the dim light. Xiao Chui looked at the familiar figure in front of her. After a moment of shock, she waved her arms excitedly and shouted, Li, we're here. Chapter 870. Xiao Chui waved her hand and turned to look at Zheng Zumo. She said proudly, Miss, I was right, wasn't I? Fate is something that no one can say for sure. Li also felt that this sort of thing like fate was really too wonderful for words. That person is really at the place where the lights are fading. Mississippi Lu stuffed the lantern into his arms and turned to enter the field that Rui and the others had just entered. Li turned his head to take a look. In the end, he still walked towards the figures in front of him. He looked at the more than 10 lanterns hanging on Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu and said in surprise, Why did you buy so many? Xiao Chui shook her head and said proudly, I didn't buy them. They were all won by Miss and Sister Ruoqing. Xuanhuan followed behind Li and looked around. She suddenly didn't know what to do. Yongning ran in Zheng Zumo's direction excitedly. Apart from her brother and sister Bingning, she liked Sister Zumo the most. Goddess Luo Shui looked at him and asked in confusion, Is it just you guys? As soon as she said that, Rui and Lin Wanru had already walked out from the field on the side. Although Mississippi Lu also walked out, she stood far away. Goddess Luo Shui ignored him and quickly walked over. She bowed to Rui and said in a low voice, Greetings, sister. We are a family. There is no need to be so formal. Rui smiled and took her hand. I saw a few clothes inside just now. They are very suitable for you. Let's go in and have a look. Zheng Zumo nodded and said, I will listen to you. The two went in hand. Yongning also went in holding Zheng Zumo's hand. Xuanhuan and Xiao Chui followed closely behind. Ruoqing glanced at him, smiled and went in as well. In an instant on the street, there was only him and Lolita left. Lolita held his arm and said solemnly, Don't worry, sir. I will never leave you behind. Li rubbed her head. The arrogant Loli squinted her eyes, a satisfied look on her face. She suddenly opened her eyes and looked at Li. She said seriously, I will never abandon you. Can you promise me that you will never abandon Shanning? Li smiled and nodded. All right. Pinky promise. That Sundra Loli stretched out her pinky. Pinky promise. Although it was just a child's words that could not be taken seriously, Li Yi's heart was full of gratification at this moment. He smiled and said, They can go shopping by themselves. Sir will take you to eat delicious food, only you. Okay. The proud Lolita widened her eyes and her face was filled with joy. Although Mr. had never written a poem for her, he only brought her to eat delicious food. He did not bring Yongning, Sister Zumo, Sister Rui, Sister Xuanhuan, or Royal Sister. In short, she was the only man in the world now. Mississippi Lu leaned against the wall and watched the two figures disappear into the crowd. She looked at the lights everywhere with a slightly dazed expression. Lin Wanru did not follow Rui and the others in. She stood on the other side a few feet away and looked at the lanterns hanging outside. There were poems written on those lanterns. She walked from the first row and stopped in front of each lantern for a short while. Of course, some of them took a longer time and some of them she just glanced at. Until the last one. This time she stayed for a full quarter of an hour. At a certain moment she stood a little closer and murmured softly, searching for her thousands of times in the crowd. Suddenly looking back, that person is there, in the dim light. This poem? What does it mean? Hearing the voice beside her, she turned her head and looked at Mississippi Lu. She smiled and said, although I don't know who wrote this poem and what kind of state of mind he had at that time, but from the literal meaning, it should be that the person who wrote this poem went through hardships just to find a person, but in the end, he realized that the person he was looking for was actually by his side all along. Mississippi Lu was stunned and asked, isn't it, in the dim light? Lin Wanru shook her head and said, the dim light is just a reference. The main point of this poem is suddenly looking back. She looked at Mississippi Lu, who suddenly turned around and ran into the surging crowd. She stretched out her hand and said in surprise, Miss Rui? Her figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. Lin Wanru only put down her hand after a long time. She shook her head in confusion and turned around to look at the lantern again. Li Yi held the lantern in one hand and used the other to protect the proud lowly swinging leg on his chest. This way she wouldn't fall off from his shoulder. The proud lowly held a small bag in her hand. There were all kinds of snacks in it. While eating, she didn't forget to stuff some into Li Yi's mouth from time to time. Surrounded by the crowd, there was a street performer performing the sword swallowing technique. The proud lowly was watching happily, so Li Yi didn't tell her the secret behind it. Suddenly, someone grabbed one of his arms. Li Yi turned around and looked at Mississippi Lu in surprise. He asked, why are you here? Give me back my lantern. Mississippi Lu snatched the lantern from his hand. Then, she decisively turned around and disappeared into the street again. Li Yi looked at the crowd on the street in surprise. She was the one who didn't want the lantern earlier, but now she was blaming him. However, when he thought about how it wasn't the first time she did this, he could only shake his head and sigh. Women's minds are not something you can guess. The proud lowly felt wronged and looked in the same direction as him. She said weakly, that's my lantern? Miss Xuanhuan's zither skills are getting better and better. In the deepest private room on the second floor of the wonderful sound pavilion, Chu Ping stood up from the praying mat in the middle of the room. He looked at the curtain in front of him and said with a smile, that song just now has reached the realm of emotional harmony. It can stir up the emotions in the depths of one's heart. To be honest, I've only heard this kind of zither music from an old friend of Grandpa's. According to Grandpa, that person is already standing at the peak of the path of music. Miss Xuanhuan is still so young. It's truly unbelievable. Behind the curtain, the young girl's hands were still on the zither. Perhaps it was because she had used up too much energy, but her face was pale and her forehead was covered in sweat. She didn't wipe away the sweat. Her eyes stared blankly in front of her and didn't reply. After a long time she said, young Master Chu, come in. Come in? Chu Ping was slightly startled. Normally, even if he stayed in the same room with Miss Xuanhuan, there would always be a curtain between them. This was the first time Miss Xuanhuan invited him in. A thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Could it be that Cui Shixin was right? He tidied up his clothes and said, then, I'll come in. Chu Ping slowly walked over and gently lifted the curtain. The young girl was sitting with her back facing him. In front of her was a zither. Miss Xuanhuan? He had just opened his mouth to speak when the young girl stood up. The clothes that were as thin as a cicada's wings slowly fell off her body, revealing her naked body. Chu Ping looked at her in a daze. Aunt Xuanhuan, you? The young girl slowly turned around and faced him. She said softly, young master's great kindness, this little girl is unable to repay it. The only thing I can give young master is this pure body. Chu Ping clenched his fists and looked away with difficulty. He gritted his teeth and said, if you only want to repay a debt of gratitude. The young girl's face suddenly revealed a flowery smile. She took a step forward and gently embraced Chu Ping. She murmured, in Xuanhuan's heart she also likes young master, he said in a low voice, when it comes to this kind of thing I'm a little different from others. The young girl raised her head and looked at him. She said emotionally, Xuanhuan is willing to do anything for young master. Chu Ping's body suddenly trembled. A look of joy appeared on his face and his breathing gradually became rapid. Fortunately, the bailiffs who were searching for the imperial court's criminal were from the capital governor's manor, so the Chui family was able to exert some influence. Otherwise, this scandal, which was enough to affect the reputation of the Chu family, would have spread far and wide. Cui Shixin raised his head to take another look, then slowly stood up and walked upstairs. On the main street, passers-by saw the officials blocking the entrance of the wonderful sound pavilion. They stopped in their tracks and watched from afar. In the restaurant on the opposite side, a large man poured warm wine into a cup and handed it to a middle-aged man opposite him. "Fifth master, the wine is warmed." The middle-aged man raised his wine cup. The burly man was about to sit down opposite him when he saw that the burly man's hand was trembling non-stop. The wine in the cup spilled all over his sleeves, but he didn't seem to care at all. He raised his hand and brought the wine cup to his lips. At this moment, there was not a single drop of wine left in the cup. "Fifth master, what's wrong? Are you very cold?" The large man hurried over and saw that the window behind the middle-aged man was open. He immediately said, "I'll go close the window." He stood in front of the window and glanced down. "Strange, what are those people looking at down there? Don't close it." At this moment, the middle-aged man's gloomy voice seemed to come from his throat. "But if you don't close it, the wind outside will blow in." I said, "Don't close it." Okay, if you don't close it, then don't close it." The large man helplessly shook his head. He waved at the waiter beside him and said, "Bring a heater over, hurry." The middle-aged man raised the empty cup and drank a mouthful. When he put down the cup, his arm couldn't help but tremble. The cup knocked against the table and made a clear sound. This attracted the attention of the people at the neighboring table. The large man walked over and looked at him. He asked in fear, Fifth master, are you sick?" "I'm fine." The middle-aged man didn't raise his hand. He said in a deep voice, "Pour the wine." "But, pour the wine." The large man could only obey. He watched as the cup of wine was brought to his mouth. There was not a single drop left, but he still pretended to drink heartily. He shook his head and filled the empty cup again. "I've been ordered to search for the imperial court's criminal. Don't touch the people inside." One of the constables kicked open the door and saw two naked worms on the bed in the room. He shouted loudly. The man and woman on the bed had long been scared silly. Two bailiffs had already rushed in and roughly swept their eyes over them. Their gazes fiercely landed on the woman's body a few times, then looked at the man. They waved their hands with some disdain and said, "It's all right, you guys can continue." After walking out of the room, they looked at each other and walked straight to the innermost room. "I've been ordered to search for the imperial court's criminal. Don't touch the people inside." The leading bailiff kicked the door open. The other two bailiffs immediately rushed in and rushed to the bed behind the curtain. Behind the curtain, the man's heavy breathing suddenly stopped and turned into panic. Who are you people?" The leading bailiff looked at the man on the bed and was stunned for a moment. He immediately cupped his fists and said, my apologies. I didn't know young Master Chu was here and disturbed you. Please forgive us. We will leave immediately. He looked at the bed. Chu Ping's hand was still on the woman's neck. The woman's exposed body was also covered in green whip marks and candle tears. The constable sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at Chu Ping. He cupped his fists again and said, "This? Young Master Chu's preferences are really unique. Young Master Chu, don't worry. We didn't hear or see anything tonight. Please continue." He waved at the two people in the room and said, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and leave." When they reached the door, a figure came in from outside. Cui Shixin looked at them and his face darkened. He said angrily, "Who let you in?" The bailiff smiled apologetically. Before he could say what he had rehearsed beforehand, he suddenly heard a terrified voice from the bedside. Chu Ping fell from the bed. His face was pale and bloodless. He murmured, "This can't be real. This can't be real. Xuanhuan, wake up. I didn't use any force just now. I really didn't use any force just now." The bailiff looked at this scene in astonishment. Before he could ask, one of the bailiffs looked at the naked woman lying on the bed. He slowly extended his hand and put it in front of her nose. He then turned his head and said in disbelief, Dead? What?" Cui Yinshin and the bailiff's expressions changed at the same time. In the restaurant, the burly man looked at the middle-aged man whose clothes were mostly wet. He shook the empty wine flask and said, "Fifth Lord, there's no more wine. Let's go back." The middle-aged man picked up the remaining wine in his cup and slowly spilled it on the floor. He supported himself on the table and stood up with some difficulty. He said in a hoarse voice, "Let's go back. That person is the Qin clan's fifth lord? Based on the way that man addressed him, it should be him. I heard that when this Qin clan's fifth lord was young, he was a famous person in the capital. However, because the Qin clan had Qin Yin, he usually kept a low profile. How did he become like this now? You don't know. AI, this matter is also a sin." Downstairs, the burly man walked out of the restaurant with the middle-aged man on his back. He looked at the crowd and asked, "Fifth Lord, do you want to stay and watch the show?" A light cough came from behind him, followed by a hoarse voice, "Let's go back." "You really don't want to watch?" the burly man asked doubtfully. "Let's go back." All right, let's go back." The burly man shook his head and sighed. He carried the middle-aged man on his back and disappeared into the crowd. Chapter 872. How is this possible? Cui Xixin's face was pale and his expression was one of fear. Is she really dead? How did she die? The bailiff once again placed his hand under the woman's nose and carefully examined her neck. With great difficulty he said, She was strangled to death by young Master Chu. Chu Ping sluggishly sat on the ground and continued to mutter to himself, it wasn't me. I told you that if she couldn't take it anymore she could just pat the bed and I would stop. Chu Ping, quickly put on your clothes and come with us. Cui Xixin finally came back to his senses. He looked at Chu Ping and said anxiously. He then instructed the constable, go and open the window at the back. You two stand guard here. Don't let anyone in. Their original plan was to use the matter of Chu Ping visiting a prostitute to make the Chu family owe them a small favor. Who would have thought that a life would be lost? This favor was too great. Not only could the Chu family not bear it, they couldn't pay it back either. He looked at Chu Ping, who was still in a daze, and solemnly said, remember, the person who killed Lady xuanhuan was the criminal of the imperial court who jumped out of the window. When that villain wanted to hurt you, it was fortunate that the bailiffs from the capital governor's office arrived in time. Seeing that Chu Ping was still sitting there and muttering to himself, Cui Xixin fiercely slapped his face and angrily said, did you hear me clearly? Chu Ping's mouth was overflowing with blood as he raised his head to look at him. His eyes gradually regained their clarity and he nodded, I heard it clearly. Cui Xixin walked out and closed the door. He said to the two bailiffs at the door, watch this place, no one is allowed to enter or leave. The beautiful woman walked over and worriedly asked, young Master Cui inside, shut up. Cui Xixin coldly looked at her and said, have everyone go downstairs. I suspect that there is a criminal of the imperial court among them. If they are found, your wonderful sound pavilion will not be able to escape responsibility. The beautiful woman's face paled. Criminal of the imperial court? In the Cui clan, Cui Qingming sat in the main hall, leisurely drinking tea. When he saw Cui Xixin rushing in from outside, he stood up and frowned. What's wrong? Did you not succeed? Didn't you already use 1,000 silver taels to bribe that girl? Cui Xixin swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said with a trembling voice, it's done. Since it's done, why are you panicking? But that woman was killed by Chu Ping. What? Cui Qingming suddenly stood up. The teacup fell to the ground with a clang and shattered. He looked at Cui Xixin and asked in disbelief, that woman is dead? Father, don't worry. For the time being, no more people know about this. I've already sent people to control that place. Cui Xixin looked at him and said anxiously, Father, what should we do now? If they were only acting in secret, a few lives were nothing to them. However, the problem was that today's matter was specially arranged by them. Those bailiffs had caused such a huge commotion, it was impossible for them to easily cover it up. What about the capital governor's residence? Cui Xixin immediately said, I haven't sent anyone to inform them yet. Send someone to tell Lord Tseng to slow down his actions. What about you, father? Get someone to prepare a carriage. I want to go to the Chu family immediately. In the Chu family, a middle-aged man looked at Cui Qingming and said, Brother Cui, why have you come to the Chu family so late at night? Father is already asleep. If there's anything we can talk about it tomorrow. Cui Qingming took a deep breath and said, Brother Chu, time is of the essence. I don't have time to explain to you now. If there's any delay, nephew Chu Ping will probably be in big trouble. Upon hearing his son's name, the middle-aged man immediately asked, What big trouble? Cui Qingming said in a low voice, It concerns nephew Chu Ping's life and even more so, the Chu family's reputation. The middle-aged man's expression changed drastically. He immediately said, "Brother Chui, please sit here for a moment. I'll immediately invite father over." Chui Qingming didn't sit for long before he saw Grand Tutor Chu draped in a thick cloak and supported by someone. He hurriedly got up and said respectfully, "Greetings, Lord Grand Tutor." The old man waved his hand and asked, "Just what happened? Speak." Chui Qingming hesitated for a moment, then said, "Tonight, xianxia and nephew Chu Ping went to the Fine Sound Pavilion to listen to music. A woman in the pavilion revealed her feelings to Chu Ping. It's hard for young people to be a little impatient. Coincidentally, the constables of the capital governor's residence were searching for a criminal of the imperial court, and they accidentally ran into the two of them having sex." The middle-aged man's expression relaxed slightly. If it was just this, it wouldn't be too serious. It was just a normal affair between a man and a woman, and it didn't count as visiting prostitutes. Even if it did, although it would damage the Chu family's reputation, it wouldn't be so serious that it would endanger their lives. The old man looked at him with a sharp gaze. "You came here so late at night for this?" Chui Qingming lowered his head and said in a low voice, "When the constables of the capital governor's residence went in, that woman was dead." A terrified expression appeared on the middle-aged man's face. The old man's body trembled and he couldn't even hold his crutch steadily. His beard trembled and he struggled to stand. He repeatedly said, this animal?" Chui Qingming looked up and asked, "Xianxia has already ordered people to temporarily suppress this matter. Now, the people of the capital governor's residence will most likely go over. Qingming came here in the middle of the night to ask Lord Grand Tutor how this matter should be handled." The old man trembled as he walked to a chair and sat down. After a long silence, he waved his hand dispiritedly and said, "This old man is not the capital governor's residence. There is no need to ask me about this matter." A trace of anxiety appeared on the face of the middle-aged man beside him. He was about to speak when Chui Qingming suddenly said, "The criminal of the imperial court that the capital governor's residence captured was truly deranged. He hid in the Fine Sound Pavilion and not only used cruel methods to kill that young lady, but he also wanted to harm nephew Chu Ping. Fortunately, the constables arrived in time." The old man didn't reply. He used the chair to support himself as he stood up with difficulty. His murky gaze rested on Chui Qingming for a long time before he waved his hand and said, "This old man is tired. Qingming is truly sorry to disturb Grand Tutor. Grand Tutor, please do not worry. This matter will definitely not involve nephew Chu Ping." Chui Qingming said this and bowed. "Grand Tutor, rest early. Qingming will return first." The old man used his crutch to walk out the door. He shook off the middle-aged man's support and said in a hoarse voice, "When you return, have him kneel in the ancestral hall." The middle-aged man's expression was complicated as he slowly nodded. "Fifth Master, I'm leaving." The large man looked at the middle-aged man who had already taken off his clothes and went to bed. After saying this, he slowly retreated. A woman wearing coarse clothing walked over with a warm stove in her hand. She said, "The master is afraid of the cold, so I brought an extra stove in." The large man opened the door and said, "I'll help you put it in." The woman smiled and shook her head. "No need. Your hands and feet are clumsy and your footsteps are heavy. The master has just fallen asleep and will be woken up by others. It's better if I go, you go rest." The large man rubbed his head in embarrassment. Then I'll go to sleep first." The woman nodded. After the large man left, she walked into the room and placed the stove on the ground beside the bed. She straightened her body and looked at the middle-aged man on the bed in the darkness. She sighed and said, "You don't need to be sad. Xuanhuan's body doesn't have many days left. Lianer used to love her the most. To be able to do something for you before she goes to see Lianer, she must be very happy." In the darkness, the middle-aged man lying on the bed suddenly opened his eyes. He clenched his fists and tore the bedsheets. A suppressed, beast-like roar came from his throat. "There's a way, there must be another way. She doesn't need to do this, she doesn't need to do this." In the wonderful sound pavilion, a bailiff once again turned his head to look at the bed. A puzzled expression appeared on his face. He pushed the person next to him and whispered, "Look, isn't she smiling?" The bailiff turned his head to look and saw that the woman was already dead. Sure enough, there was a faint smile on her face. He walked over and covered her body with the bedsheet. He let out a long sigh. "She's also a pitiful person." Early in the morning, the large man pushed open the door and walked out. The cold wind blew against his face and made him shiver. He looked at the courtyard full of white in a daze and muttered, "Didn't it get warmer a few days ago? Why is it snowing again?" He returned to his room and wrapped himself with another layer of clothing. Then he walked out through the garden path and walked towards a courtyard. He stopped halfway. In the depths of the garden, a plum blossom tree had quietly bloomed. It immediately added a few more decorations to the vast expanse of white in the garden. In front of the plum blossom tree, a figure stood straight in the snowflakes that filled the sky. "Fifth Lord, you came out so early today. Why didn't you open an umbrella?" The large man walked over and carefully brushed away the snowflakes on the middle-aged man's shoulders and body. He saw that a thick layer of snow had also fallen on the middle-aged man's head. It was unknown how long he had been standing there. He gently swept away the snowflakes on the middle-aged man's hair. However, there were a few places where the snowflakes couldn't be swept away no matter what. The middle-aged man's movements became sluggish. He looked at the middle-aged man in a daze and a shocked expression appeared on his face. Fifth Lord, you," the middle-aged man turned his head to look at him. He revealed a smile and said, "This person, if you don't pay attention, you will grow old." Chapter 873. Li Yi was woken up by the cold in the morning. Since a few days before the Lantern Festival, the weather had gradually turned warm. Even the quilt on his bed had been changed to a thin one. However, he couldn't stand the cold in the middle of the night. He curled up his body and didn't sleep well. He slept in a daze until dawn. Of course, the reason why he woke up was because the proud Lolita ran in and put her cold little hand into the quilt. He didn't know what she had just done, but her little hand was like an ice cube. After a shiver, he was no longer sleepy. "Sir, get up. The sun is shining on your butt." The proud Lolita was wearing a thick cotton-padded coat. She rolled around the bed like a bear. Li Yi wanted to sleep a little longer in the quilt, so he had to get up. He put on his coat and asked casually, "Why are you here so early today? Don't you need to pay your respects to your father?" The proud Lolita lay on the bed and shook her legs. She said with a sad face, "Father is sick. The imperial doctor said that father needs to rest well these days. I came over after seeing him outside." These days the old emperor's illness had become more and more serious. Li Yi was a little worried. He only hoped that the winter would pass quickly and that the worst situation would not happen now. Hearing the noise and laughter coming from outside, he wondered, "What's going on outside?" The proud Lolita curled her lips and said, "They are having a snowball fight. Sister Xuanhuan is already 17 years old, but she is still so childish. I have long stopped playing that kind of game." Li Yi was stunned and asked, "It's snowing?" The proud Lolita nodded and said, "It started last night. It's very, very heavy. Sir, hurry up and get up. Let's go outside and make a snowman. Make the biggest one and make it bigger than theirs." The sudden heavy snow fell silently. Compared to previous years, there was not much snow this winter. However, it still snowed after the Upper Lantern Festival. This was something that had never happened in recent years. Of course, the night of the Upper Lantern Festival did not only have heavy snow, but also poetry. Searching for her thousands of times in the crowd. But when I look back, that person is standing in the dim light. This poem only took half a night to spread among the circle of scholars in the capital. The #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom, whose poems had not been circulated for a long time, was so extravagant. This once again cemented his position in the hearts of those who loved poetry. This was not the only incident that caused a stir in the capital last night. There was a vicious court criminal who, while hiding from the bailiffs, hid in a music hall in the capital. After being discovered, in his anger and humiliation, he killed a musician in the music hall and escaped through the window. Now, his wanted poster had been posted all over the streets and alleys of the capital, as well as all the city gates. Furthermore, because that scoundrel had almost injured the young master of the Chu family, the capital governor's manor had already strictly ordered the yamen in the capital region to investigate the whereabouts of that criminal and offered a large reward. This made it so that if the people of Jingdo saw an unidentified outsider outside, they would all secretly pay more attention. The capital yamen. After an old man washed his hands in a copper basin, he respectfully said, "Sir, we have already investigated. This woman died because she suffocated. The 2 strangulation marks on her neck are the cause of her death." Zheng Shichen's face darkened. "Has the identity of this woman been investigated?" A bailiff came forward and said, "Sir, we have already asked the people in the Wonderful Sound Pavilion. That woman was a musician in the pavilion and had a bit of fame. She did not go to the Wonderful Sound Pavilion every day. As for the situation of her family, we are still not clear. We have already sent more people to investigate." The old man hesitated for a moment and then opened his mouth. Sir, according to my examination, this woman was actually already infected with a serious illness and did not have much time left. Even if this did not happen, I'm afraid she would not live for more than half a year. Xianxia sighed and said, even if she was already beyond cure and did not have much time left, half a year is still 180 days, 2,160 hours. This is still a case of murder. Someone finally stood up behind Xianxia. Cui Qingming looked at the few people in the hall and said, you may leave first. When the coroner and the bailiffs heard this, they immediately bowed and retreated. Cui Qingming looked at Xianxia and said slowly, this matter involves the Chu family. The royal tutor has already tacitly agreed to it, so there is no need to complicate matters. Furthermore, that woman does not have much time left. Sir Tseng should know what to do, right? Of course I know the severity of the matter. Xianxia waved his hand. I will order people to quickly search for that criminal. Don't worry. Cui Qingming smiled. Then I can rest assured. Xianxia looked at him and asked, are you sure that this matter alone will make the Chu family wholeheartedly help us? Don't worry, the royal tutor is a smart man. If this matter is exposed, the Chu family's reputation will suffer a severe blow. The royal tutor may not care about himself or Chu Ping, but he will definitely not ignore the reputation that the Chu family has painstakingly built up bit by bit. Cui Qingming smiled again. If that's the case, that woman's death is not completely useless. His Highness the King of Shu is still more important. Xianxia nodded and clenched his fists tightly in his sleeves. He looked at him calmly and said, since that's the case, leave the matters here to me. I believe in Sir Tseng. Cui Qingming cupped his hands at him and said, I have to personally give a reply to the Chu family. I will take my leave first. Take care. After sending off Cui Qingming, Qin Chong, who had been drinking tea to the side, stood up and said, if this is all we have, we won't be able to touch the Chu family. Xianxia shook his head. It's not that we can't touch them, but that the time is not right. The time is not right? Qin Chong was taken aback. Then he looked at him and narrowed his eyes. Do you know what you will do when the time comes? You must give up something to gain. Xianxia looked at him and slowly said, if you want to obtain something, you must first give up something. Be *****, you be *****. My Chu family has been of noble character and unquestionable integrity for generations. How did we produce a be **** like you? Chu Ping knelt on the ground. In front of him were the memorial tablets of the Chu family's ancestors. Grand Tutor Chu raised the cane in his hand and struck it repeatedly on his back. The clothes on his back were already in tatters, and his back was a bloody mess. Grand Tutor Chu's breathing was ragged. A middle-aged man hurriedly patted him on the back and said, Father, don't be agitated. Grand Tutor Chu shook off his hand and looked at him. He said angrily, you taught your son well. His son had always been traveling with his father, and he had never taught him anything. Although the middle-aged man felt wronged, he did not dare to say anything. Chu Ping knelt there and wailed, it's all my fault. I've disgraced the Chu family's ancestors. Grandfather just beat me to death. Beat you to death? What's the use of beating you to death? Will that woman come back to life if I beat you to death? Although the old man said this, the cane that he had raised did not come down again. He panted slightly and glanced at Chu Ping. A trace of loneliness appeared on his face. As he turned to leave, he said, let the ancestors of the Chu family watch. Let him kneel here for 3 days. Chu Ping lay on the ground, his body trembling. He loudly said, thank you, grandfather, thank you, grandfather. Chapter 874. Qin Family. After the family banquet, Qin Xiang looked at his eldest son and said, the reform mentioned this morning is related to agriculture. If you are not careful, it will shake the foundation of the country. You must be very careful with every step you take. You must not be careless. Qin Yan immediately nodded. Father, don't worry. I will be extra careful. However, since it is a reform, you don't need to be too conservative. Don't be too careful, Qin Yan respectfully said, I understand. After the conversation, Qin Xiang stood up and walked out of the room. Halfway through, he realized that he had left a dossier he had read before the meal on the chair. He turned back, and when he stepped through the door again, he was slightly startled. There was only one person left in the hall. That person was a bit thin. He stood up from the corner of the banquet table and placed the leftovers in front of him. Before he sat down, he saw Qin Xiang standing at the door. Father? He looked at Qin Xiang and was surprised. Seeing him looking at him, he looked down and smiled. There is still a lot of food left. If I don't eat, it will be a waste. Xianxia looked at his youngest son and was startled. There were strands of white hair on his head. When he smiled, there were wrinkles on his face. He was the youngest of the 5 Qin brothers, but he looked much older than his eldest brother. The old man realized that he had not paid attention to his son for a long time. Those dishes are already cold. If you're not full, just ask the kitchen to make another serving. Xianxia brought the file over. When he walked out, he paused and said, "Don't eat too much at night. Rest early and be careful of your body." He nodded. "Father." Xiang heard the voice and turned around. He looked at him and said with a smile, "The court is in turmoil. Although father is in a high position, you still have to be careful." Xiang frowned and said, "Recently, the court has been unprecedentedly stable. How can there be turmoil? Don't believe the rumors outside." He listened respectfully. After he finished, he nodded and said, "Thank you, father, for the reminder. I understand." Xiang took another deep look at him, then turned around and left. 5th young Master Qin looked at the leftover soup in front of him. The clear soup reflected his image. He stroked a strand of white hair on his head and stared at the soup in a daze. On the night of the Lantern Festival, it snowed all night. Although the snowfall gradually subsided, it still did not clear up. It was still early in the morning. On the streets of the capital, other than a few shops that had their doors half closed, most of the shops that faced the streets were tightly shut. A woman with her hair wrapped up and wearing only a thin shirt stood in front of a small building and knocked for a long time. When a beautiful woman inside opened the door, she rubbed her face that was red from the cold and smiled. "My sister is a musician in this building. She came to perform on the day of the Lantern Festival and hasn't been back for 2 days. Can I trouble you to call her? She's not in good health and has to take medicine every day." The beautiful woman rubbed her sleepy eyes and yawned. She asked in a muffled voice, "What's your sister's name?" The woman smiled and said, "Her name is Xuanhuan." "Sir, what are they doing?" The proud Lolita lifted the curtain of the carriage window and saw a group of people gathered at the foot of the city wall. She turned her head and asked Li Yi. "They're probably looking at the court's criminal." As the carriage drove over, Li Yi also heard the discussion of some people on the street. It seemed that yesterday a criminal wanted by the court committed a murder case in the capital. Using the chaos of the Upper Yuan dynasty, he successfully escaped. This made the higher-ups very angry. They did not hesitate to issue a large warrant for his arrest. The bounty was even more generous. They paid a great price to capture this person and bring him to justice. The capital was under the feet of the emperor, and the criminal was a criminal wanted by the court. Coincidentally, it was the Lantern Festival. It was no wonder that the higher-ups had such a big reaction. However, with the warrant being issued, unless the criminal had the ability to change his appearance, it would not be easy for him to escape near the capital. It must be known that around Jingdo, there was a group of madmen who wanted to farm points to raise their ranking. How could they let go of such a good opportunity? In principle, for a criminal wanted by the court with great fanfare to appear in Jingdo and commit another crime was an inconceivable thing. However, there was always an oversight. At this moment, the matter of the criminal was not important to him. The old emperor's health was more important. This snow had come suddenly, and the old emperor's illness had also worsened suddenly. From the beginning, Li Yi knew that there was no possibility of his illness recovering. Sometimes it was all about luck. Even though he had already let go of court affairs and focused on recuperating, no one knew when bad luck would arrive. Li Yi's mood was a bit depressed. Some things could be solved perfectly and some things could not. Faced with this matter, even he felt a deep sense of helplessness from the bottom of his heart. The carriage suddenly came to a stop. The proud Lolita lost her balance and fell on top of him. A red cloud appeared on her face. In a small voice she said, "Sir, I didn't do it on purpose." Li Yi supported her waist and helped her sit properly. The angry scolding of a palace guard could already be heard from outside. "How do you walk? Don't you have eyes?" After scolding, the guard knocked on the carriage in a panic and asked, "Your Highness, are you all right?" "I'm fine," the proud Lolita replied in a small voice. She then asked, "What happened outside?" The guard immediately said, "A woman suddenly walked out of the alley and almost ran into her. I had no choice but to rein in the horse and disturb your Highness. Please forgive me, your Highness." The proud Lolita asked in a quiet voice, "She didn't hurt anyone, did she?" A guard had already helped the woman who had fallen to the ground up. He furrowed his brows and asked, "Are you all right?" The woman didn't look at him. Her eyes were unfocused as she walked forward in a daze. Strange person. The guard glanced at her and turned his head. Your Highness, she didn't hurt anyone. Let's keep going. Li Yi lifted the curtain to take a look, only to see a distant silhouette. He shook his head and lowered the curtain again. After visiting the old emperor, the dark clouds in Li Yi's heart dissipated a little when he walked out of the hall. Naturally, it was because his illness wasn't as serious as he had expected. It was probably because of the sudden drop in temperature that he was having a relapse. A eunuch led him to the side hall and said that the heir and the eldest princess were already waiting there. When Li Yi and the proud Lolita walked in, they found that they weren't the only ones in the side hall. Princess Ning was holding Mingzhu's hand and talking. Li Xian was playing chess with Ning Wang. Seeing them enter, Princess Ning waved at the proud Lolita. "Xianing, come quickly, come here." Li Yi bowed slightly and said, "Greetings to Ning Wang and Princess Ning." Every year at the beginning of the year, the nobles from all over would enter the capital. Because Li Xian was in the capital, Ning Wang's family would often stay for a few more days. "Dr. Li, no need to be so courteous." Ning Wang waved his hand and looked at him. He shook his head and said, "In terms of the ability to judge people, I really am not as good as my royal brother. Dr. Li is an outstanding person. I actually misjudged you back then." Chapter 875. You flatter me, Your Highness. Li Yi cupped his hands in greeting politely. He did not appear overly intimate, nor did he appear overly distant. His friendship with Li Xian was limited to the two of them. He once had some connection with Ning Wangfu, but that was a long time ago. You've been in the capital for so long and you even have a child, but your chess skills haven't improved at all. Ning Wang picked up a black piece and put it down. He looked at Li Xian and shook his head. Li Xian smiled awkwardly and said, "Father's chess skills are superb. I am ashamed." Ning Wang looked up at Li Yi and suddenly said, "I wonder if Dr. Li is interested in playing a game with I? To tell you the truth." Li Yi looked at Ning Wang and shook his head. "I am not proficient in Go." He was speaking the truth. He had never played Go in his previous life. Although the rules and playing methods could be easily learned, he couldn't learn the experience. Otherwise he wouldn't have to play with the proud Loli and release the Dumbo, the earth-drilling mouse, and the celestial dog. With his current level of Go, he could only fool ordinary people. He was far from a master of Go. Li Xian had already given up his seat. He said, "You are the #1 talent of the Jing Kingdom. Don't be humble. It would be best if you could win a few games against father and help me save some face." Li Xian stood up. Ning Wang was sitting across from him and looking at him. It would be too awkward to refuse again. Li Yi could only nod and sit across from Ning Wang. "Sir, you are playing Go with uncle." The proud Loli ran over from the side and sat next to Li Yi. She propped up her chin with her hands and poked her head out to watch the game. Princess Ning and Mingzhu also walked over. Ning Wang looked up at Li Mingzhu and said, "These days, thanks to you, brother can recuperate in peace. If it were anyone else, he wouldn't be able to relax in the affairs of the court." Princess Ning held her hand and said worriedly, "Look, it has only been a year. You are so thin now." Li Yi didn't quite understand Princess Ning's words. She drank soup every day and he even added some special ingredients to the soup. How was she skinny? Martial artists like her had well-proportioned bodies and didn't have any excess fat on their bodies. From head to toe, there were parts of her body that were fatter than a year ago. It was impossible for her to be skinny. It is indeed inappropriate to let you decide the affairs of the country alone. Prince Ning put down a piece and said, "The efficiency in the 3 provinces is low, and there are many useless people. Outside the 3 provinces, you should make an exception and find some talented and virtuous people to help you deal with those trivial matters." You. After he said, he looked at Yi and said, "Dr. Li is really not good at Go." Before Li Yi could speak, the proud Loli wrinkled her nose and said, "Uncle, I will play for you." Ning Wang smiled and said, "Since when does our Xianing know how to play Go? I will not play with you. If your father knows, he will say that I am bullying the young." The proud Loli put a piece on the board and said discontentedly, "Uncle, don't look down on me. I am very good at Go." Good. Xianing is the best." Seeing that Li Yi didn't mind, Prince Ning didn't say much. He played with her hand, but his moves were not as sharp as before and became casual. Princess Ning continued the conversation and looked at Mingzhu. She said, "Your uncle is right. You still need to find someone to help you in the affairs of the country. The capital governor is good. The people from the Xin family are said to be very capable. Prime Minister Qin is old now, but there are still a few people from the Qin family in the court. Like father, like son. In short, it is not so easy to take over the government affairs. Don't tire yourself out. Dong Wenyun is indeed very capable. Although the one from the Shin family is not as good as him, he is also not bad. As for the Qin family, except for Prime Minister Qin, there is no one capable. Prince Ning shook his head. He seemed to think of something and said, Qin he of the Qin family, what is his position in the court now? Qin? A glimmer of confusion appeared in Mingzhu's eyes. In the second generation of the Qin family, other than Qin Yan, there were two other people who were officials in the court. She had never heard of this Qin He. Li Yi, who was watching the proud lowly play go, said, Qin He, the fifth son of Prime Minister Qin. He has always been idle at home and has no official position. That is a bit strange. Prince Ning shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He continued to talk about the matters of the court with the eldest princess. Li Yi had always thought that this Prince Ning, who was far away from the capital, was just an idle prince. However, when he talked about these matters, it was as if he had been in the court for a long time. It was truly surprising. Qin He, the fifth master of the Qin family. He had just said that the Qin family had no one capable, but he had singled out Qin He. What was so special about this fifth master of the Qin family? From Wu Er's side, there would often be news of the Qin family. More or less, the name of the fifth master of the Qin family would appear. However, the general description was the same as the rumors in the outside world. This fifth master of the Qin family did not have much of a position in the Qin family. He could even bully the younger generation of the Qin family as he pleased. As a result, he had always been in a state of self-abandonment. However, sometimes he would do some strange things. The proud lowly saw that his mood was not too high and thought that he was upset because he couldn't beat Imperial Uncle Ning Wang. She patted her little chest and said, Sir, don't worry, we are about to win. Prince Ning, who was talking to Mingzhu, turned his head and couldn't resist smiling. Although little Xianning knew how to play Go, which was somewhat unexpected, her skill level was not high. He only needed to casually deal with it. This Dr. Li was a friend of Mingzhu and Xian. Naturally, he couldn't let him lose too badly. However, this game of Go had reached this point, so there was no need to continue. He smiled and picked up a chess piece. Just as he was about to put it on a certain position, his arms sank halfway. After a slight pause, he could no longer smile. The proud lowly raised Li Yi's palm and reached out her little hand to give it a pat. She said with a smile, Sir, we won. The princesses of the royal family were not easy to deal with. Don't compete with Mingzhu, don't play Go with Xianning. This was an iron rule. Prince Ning lost a game of Go. He was surprised by the proud lowly's Go skills and proposed another game. Of course, the proud lowly would not refuse. After all, Prince Ning had been immersed in Go for many years. No matter how talented the proud lowly was, she was only 14 years old. After a fierce fight, she gradually fell into a disadvantage. Of course, the one who lost in the end was still Prince Ning. Turning defeat into victory and reversing the situation was the proud lowly's specialty. Especially after she used the flying chess, the invisible chess, and the ultimate move of eating up the small chess pieces, Prince Ning lost without any suspense. The old emperor's illness was not as serious as he had imagined, which made him feel a little relieved. On his way home, sitting in the carriage, he inadvertently glanced out through the gap of the curtain, only to find that Fang seemed to have a lot on his mind. Before he could ask, Fang opened the curtain a little and asked, Young master, I have a question to ask you. Li sat up straight. The first thing he thought about was whether he had encountered anything recently, so that he wouldn't be hurt by his words. After finding that he probably hadn't, he looked at him and said, What's the matter? Say it. Fang looked at him and hesitated for a long time before he said, I want to take little Hong home. What do you think will happen? I think you will die. Li looked at him and said without any hesitation. He was well aware of his sister-in-law's temperament. She had bought a large mansion in the capital city, and all the servants in the house were men. Not to mention young and beautiful maidservants, there wasn't even an old lady with yellow pearls. Forget about bringing Xiaohong back. If she knew what Lao Fang had been secretly doing for the past 2 years, Lao Fang wouldn't be sitting in the carriage and asking him this question now. With his timid personality, how could he suddenly have such a suicidal idea? Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him and asked suspiciously, You didn't take the girl's body and now you can't take it anymore, right? How could that be? Fang waved his hands repeatedly. Young master, even you don't dare to do this kind of thing, how could I? Really? Really? Fang raised a hand. I swear if I say half a word of lie, let me be struck by lightning. No sincerity. Li shook his head and said, It's winter, how could there be lightning? Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, a thunderous sound suddenly exploded in his ears. Fang's whole body trembled. He looked up at the sky and found that there was no more sound. He looked at Li Yi and asked, I really didn't do it, could it be that young master? Boom, boom, boom. The deafening sound came again and it hurt people's eardrums. Chapter 876. The rumbling sound came suddenly. Fang turned over and rolled off the carriage. He looked at the sky vigilantly. After listening for a while, he realized that the sound did not come from the sky. He turned his head and saw that not far ahead, there was a woman beating the big drum in front of the yamen. What he heard just now was not thunder but the drum. He breathed a sigh of relief and jumped back into the carriage. He said, so someone is beating the court drum. I was scared to death. The court drum was a large drum erected in front of the yamen. It had two functions. One was for the county magistrate to beat the drum to gather the crowd when he went to court. The other was for the commoners who had been wronged to beat the drum to express their grievances. Li Yi lifted the curtain and took a look. The woman who had beaten the drum had already been ushered in by the yamen runners. He did not pay much attention to her. He put down the curtain and looked at old Fang. Are you serious about what you said just now? It's not a good way to go on like this. Fang sighed and said, there has to be an end to this matter. Li Yi hung the curtains to the side and asked curiously, how did you and Lil Red meet? Fang leaned against the carriage and looked at the sky. He smiled and said, about a year before you came up the mountain. At first, Li Yi thought that Fang was just a simple and honest man without many thoughts. Later he found that his thoughts, especially when it came to feelings, were extremely delicate. Under his simple and honest appearance, there was a soul of coquettishness. He and Little Red got to know each other because of the old story of a bear saving the beauty. Later they met in the jadeite courtyard by chance. As time went by, they became familiar with each other. They communicated with each other across the wall in the jadeite courtyard and gradually developed to the point where they were today. According to Fang, it was not to the point. At present, the two of them only held hands in a pure relationship. The relationship between him and Mrs. Fang should be familial, and Little Red was probably Fang's love. As for how to make the two perfectly fuse, if he knew, he wouldn't have to run between them every day. His own affairs were still a mess and he couldn't help much with Fang's family affairs. Li Yi could only shake his head and say, let's think about this at length. That's right, let's take our time to think about it. Fang nodded and said, Miss Zuemo has already succeeded. Second Miss Ruoqing, Princess Royal, Miss Lin, and even Xuanhuan hasn't married yet. I'm afraid that the little princess only has Xuanhuan in her heart. We need to think about them one by one. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, well, I'll ask Rui to go over and talk to Mrs. Fang. Tell her that you want to bring another mistress back. As the first wife of the Fang family, she should be generous and not obstruct you. She will definitely listen to Rui. How about it? That's good enough, right? Fang waved his hand repeatedly. Forget it. I can solve this kind of trivial matter myself. I don't want to trouble miss. The carriage gradually went away. In the yamen, a constable sent the woman out, shook his head and said helplessly, Miss, this case has been handled by the yamen from the beginning to the end. You can go there and ask. The woman's face was pale, but she still nodded and said, thank you, constable. The constable looked at her and said with pity, Miss, let me remind you, when you go to the yamen, don't knock the drum in front of the gate. Chu Ping Chui Shixin. Li Yi crumpled the paper in his hand into a ball and threw it into the stove. Chui Shixin and the young master of the Chu family were also in the wonderful sound pavilion when the imperial court criminal committed the murder. It was said that they were almost implicated. This was also one of the reasons why the capital governor's office placed so much importance on this case. He had never underestimated the Chu family and had always sent people to keep an eye on them. However, this matter had been handled by the yamen from the beginning to the end. Zheng Shichen hadn't sent any news, so there shouldn't be any problems. He warmed his hands by the fire, then picked up his brush and began to write on the rice paper spread out on the table. Mississippi Lou insisted that the Green Jade Case Lantern Festival he had written on the lantern that day was too sloppy. There were many words in it that she didn't recognize, so it wasn't a suitable gift. She wanted him to write it again. It was normal that Mississippi Lou couldn't recognize it. She only knew a few words and the situation that day was different. In order to speed things up, he had used a type of calligraphy that was between cursive and semi-cursive. Anyone with a bit of knowledge in calligraphy would be able to recognize it, but to an illiterate like her, it was naturally scribbled and couldn't be seen clearly. However, she was Mississippi Lou. If Second Miss wanted her to write it in regular script, she would write it in regular script. It wasn't a big deal. After Li Yi finished writing, she checked it and nodded in satisfaction. Li reminded her, "Don't forget, you still owe me something." "What is it?" asked Mississippi Lu with a frown. According to the rules of the Lantern Festival, the lantern and the sachet had to be exchanged in the end. Mississippi Lu took his lantern, so she naturally had to give him a sachet. This was the rule of the game. "Since you took my lantern, you have to give me something. It's something that you women wear closely," reminded Li again. Mississippi Lu frowned even more. "What are you talking about?" Li pointed at her chest. "You still haven't guessed it? That year in the Mid-Autumn Festival, in that garden, those women stuffed it into my arms." Mississippi Lu finally understood. The doo-doo that was stuffed into his arms was thrown away by her. She looked up at him and asked coldly, "Are you sure?" Li looked at her expression and said in surprise, "It can't be. It's not something valuable. You can't even bear to give it to me. Why don't you return the lantern to me? I don't want that thing anymore. Come in, I'll give it to you." Mississippi Lu thought for a moment. She crossed her arms and walked into her room. She said, "Remember to close the door." It was just a sachet. Why did she have to be so mysterious and close the door? It was not like she was doing something shameful. Li shook his head and followed her in, at the entrance of the capital magistrate's office. "How many times have I told you? No one has claimed the body. It has long been buried in a mass grave. As for where it was buried, how would I know in the dark?" A bailiff impatiently waved his hand and said, "The magistrate's office is already doing its best to capture the culprit. The wanted poster has already been sent out. As long as the culprit is still in the capital, he won't be able to escape even if he has wings. Don't worry. Once we have news of the culprit, we will immediately send someone to inform you." The woman said softly, "Even in the hot summer, an unclaimed body should be kept for at least 3 days. Moreover, it is winter now, so it should be at least 7 days later. It's the new year. The coroner has already examined the body. There is nothing suspicious about the case. We just need to wait for the culprit to be brought to justice. The yamen has nowhere to keep it for you. I've already told you what you need to know. I'm warning you, don't cause trouble here again. If you do, we won't be polite anymore." When the bailiff spoke again, his tone had become angry. The woman knelt in front of the yamen and said in a sorrowful voice, "I just want to know how my sister died." On the street, passers-by gradually gathered around and looked at the woman with puzzled gazes. They looked at the yamen's door and pointed at it. When did she have another sister? In the back hall of the yamen, Shui Qingming slammed his hand on the table and said angrily. Zheng Shichen took a sip of tea and said unhurriedly, "Although this is unexpected and there are a few more variables, it may not be a bad thing. If even her family believes that the woman died at the hands of the culprit, then there will be no more changes to the case in the future. I'm just afraid that the changes will happen now." Shui Qingming narrowed his eyes and murmured. Hearing the murderous intent in Shui Qingming's words, Zheng Shichen raised his head and glanced at him. He stood and said, "This woman must not be touched." Shui Qingming smiled and said, "Brother Zheng, there is no need to remind me. I know that if anything happens to this woman, it will attract the attention of people with ulterior motives." Zheng Shichen nodded and said no more. The two of them discussed a few more things before Shui Qingming left the yamen through the back door. When he stepped onto the carriage, his body paused slightly and he turned his head to look at a guard in front of the carriage. He stretched out his hand and lightly waved it in the air. Inside the yamen, at the dining table, a woman heard the rumbling outside and put down her bowl and chopsticks. She said with dissatisfaction, "What is going on outside? There is no end to it, is there?" A yamen runner came in from outside and said with a bitter face, "My lord, that woman did not listen to our advice at all. She has begun to beat the drum and complain about her grievances again." Zheng Shichen put down his chopsticks and his face darkened. He said, "The capital yamen is not a place for her to behave atrociously. Guards, arrest that woman. Give her 20 strokes of the cane and temporarily put her in prison." The yamen runner was stunned and said with some uncertainty, "My lord, this punishment, isn't it a bit too heavy?" Zheng Shichen waved his hand. "No matter. The prestige of the yamen is not to be provoked. Only a heavy punishment will serve as a warning. Just be careful when executing the punishment." The yamen runner said no more and bowed. This subordinate obeys. Chapter 877. At the entrance of the capital magistrate's office, the woman beating the drum was once again stopped by a bailiff. Many passers-by had stopped to watch from the side of the street. They pointed at the woman not far away and whispered to each other. "I saw her beating the drum here early in the morning. I wonder what kind of injustice she has suffered? I heard that it's because of her sister's death." I also heard the bailiff say that she's a criminal. I'm afraid it's not because of the case at the Wonderful Sound Pavilion 2 days ago. That evil thief's wanted poster is posted all over the street. What's she doing here? Could it be that there's more to this case? As the crowd discussed animatedly, a bailiff walked out from inside and looked at the woman. He waved his hand and said, "Take her down. This is the capital magistrate's office. Is this a place for you to mess around?" The bailiff looked at her indifferently and turned his head to say, "Sir has ordered that this woman has repeatedly challenged the magistrate's authority and obstructed official business. Take her in and give her 20 strokes." Then he walked forward and dispersed the crowd on the street. He loudly said, "There's nothing to see here. Disperse, disperse." Although the drum at the entrance of the yamen was used by the people to seek justice, it was not allowed to be beaten randomly and disrupt the yamen's normal order. However, even though there was such a rule, the woman had just lost a loved one. It was understandable that she was grieving. To punish her like this was somewhat unreasonable in the eyes of the crowd. However, this was not something they could discuss. They could only shake their heads and disperse as they watched the woman being taken in. "Boss, are we really going to give her 20 strokes?" A bailiff looked at the thin woman and said hesitantly, "What if she dies after 20 strokes? You pig brain." The bailiff fiercely knocked on the man's head and said angrily, "Sir has said to pay attention to propriety. If she dies, you'll pay with your life." The bailiff who was knocked on the head put on a long face and asked, "What propriety?" The bailiff waved his hand. "It's enough. After beating her, take her to jail and lock her up first. Don't let her come out and cause trouble again." A moment later, the constable came to the pale-faced woman who was pressed on the stool. The scene of the woman's death that night appeared in his mind, and a trace of pity appeared on his face. He shook his head slightly and waved his hand, "Give me the board, I'll do it myself." When the two bailiffs escorted the woman into the prison, they felt that today was an eye-opener. After working in the yamen for so long, this was the first time they saw someone who could walk to the prison on her own after being flogged. "I don't want it anymore. I don't want the sachet anymore. I don't want the lantern anymore. I don't want the poem anymore." Lee covered his butt and limped out of Mississippi Lou's room. He turned around and said, "Take it if you like it. What else do you like? Just take it, it's all yours." Mississippi Lou glanced at him and said faintly, "Who told you not to make it clear?" Lee didn't want to explain anymore. Wasn't it clear enough just now? She owed him. The thing that a woman wore close to her chest, and someone had given it to him before. Other than the sachet, what else was there? A belly band? She didn't even think about it. He was a dignified county marquis, a man of indomitable spirit. How could he be so perverted? Mississippi Lou looked at him again and said, "I owe you the sachet. I'll return it to you in the future." "Forget it, not in the future. I don't want it any more." Lee rubbed his butt that was still faintly aching. When did she develop this bad habit? Couldn't she find another place to start? "You have to take it even if you don't want it." After saying this, Mississippi Lou flipped her hair and left him a cool view of her back. Although she said it directly, it was already 2 months later that he received the sachet from Mississippi Lou. If it was a simple sachet, he could just buy one on the street. However, Mississippi Lou was so picky about his gift. She even asked him to make a new copy of the poem. Of course, she wouldn't be so careless with her gift. The cloth used for the sachet was carefully selected from her collection of cloth. She heard from Xuanhuan that Second Miss took a full 3 days to choose the spices, and then to embroider something on it, sewing the broken pieces of cloth together. In this period of time, she did not know how much was wasted. That was why it dragged until now. She was very good at fighting with others, but when it came to cooking or needlework, it would greatly lower the level of most women. Lee held the sachet sewn by Mississippi Lou. He was very sure that if he wore it out, he would definitely be laughed at by others. However, looking at the eyes of Mississippi Lou, he could only ignore his conscience and nodded, "Very good, I like it very much." Mississippi Lou's somewhat nervous expression finally eased. She said, "It's my first time sewing, there are many places that are not done well, just make do with it." Lee nodded and said, "There are indeed many places that are not done well. For example, there are some marks in the stitching of the cloth, the color matching is not very good, the stitches are thin and dense, the choice of spices seems to be." Mississippi Lou looked at him calmly, "Also what?" Lee hung the sachet on his waist with satisfaction and said, "It seems, there is nothing to be picky about." No matter how ugly the sachet sewn by Mississippi Lou was, it was still unique in this world. He either insisted on this truth, or beat her and tell her what was wrong with the choice of spices and the matching. Today, Li did not have the time to fight with her for 300 rounds to correct her mistakes, because today was the day that Lin Wanru and Lin Yong set off to return to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan of merchants from the Qi Kingdom who came along with them had left the capital city long after the Lantern Festival. They had stayed for more than 2 months. If they did not return soon, the Lin family's business in the Qi Kingdom would most likely have an unforeseen event. He had discussed all the details of the cooperation with her a month ago. This time he would also send a caravan of merchants and guards to escort them to the Qi Kingdom. The caravan arrived at the city gate. Rui and Lin Wanru were talking. Rui came down from the carriage and patted her hand saying, "It's a long journey from here to the Qi Kingdom. Sister Lin, be careful on the way." Lin Wanru smiled and said, "Although it's a long journey, we've gone back and forth several times. With these guards escorting us all the way, you don't have to worry, sister." Then she walked to Li Yi's side, looked at him, smiled and stretched out her hand saying, "Goodbye." Li Yi was stunned, then he also stretched out his hand and the two of them shook hands. Lin Wanru turned her head, looked at Rui and explained, "This is a kind of etiquette in our hometown called the handshake ceremony. It's used to greet friends who have not seen each other for a long time, or to bid farewell to friends who are about to be separated." Lin Yong looked at this scene in astonishment. After scratching his head, he also stretched out his hand to Li Yi and said with a sad face, "Li brothers, goodbye." Li Yi punched him hard on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Why are you pulling a long face? It's not like you won't see each other. In less than half a year, I'm afraid you'll have to come back to the capital again." Lin Yong smiled honestly and said embarrassedly, "It's not that I can't bear to part with you, Li brothers." Li Yi smiled and said, "Two men, don't be so sentimental. I can't bear to part with the food cooked by Li brothers." After Lin Yong finished speaking, Li Yi was stunned, then he waved his hand and said, "Let's go, let's go." He watched Lin Yong get into the carriage with a big smile, leaning against the carriage and waving at him. When Lin Wanru bent down to lift the curtain, she looked back and disappeared behind the thick curtain in the next moment. The convoy slowly drove out, and when the last carriage could not be seen, Li Yi turned his head and said, "Let's go back." "Mother?" The city gate was crowded with people and it was noisy, but he and Rui both had extraordinary hearing. How could they not hear this childish and somewhat muffled voice? Rui looked down at the little fellow in the swaddling clothes, and a happy expression appeared on her face. She suddenly looked at Li Yi and asked, "Husband, did you hear that just now?" Although the 6-month-old child could not understand language yet, under the deliberate guidance of his mother, he was already able to spit out words one by one. Li Yi sighed and said, "As expected, my wife still won." Li Duan also seemed to feel Rui's joy. He curled up in the swaddling clothes and smiled. He opened his mouth again and made a vague sound. "Little, mother." Chapter 878. Li Yi gently poked the little fellow's soft face and said, "If you want to call me mother, there's no little, mother?" The two words he said were not clear. They were vague and could barely be distinguished. A 6-month-old child, even if he was gifted or had been guided early, could only say a few more words. It was unlikely that he would understand the meaning. Li Yi guessed that apart from Rui, Xuanhuan was the one who spent the most time with him. She had heard so much that when she forced herself to say it, she would naturally be confused. However, in this way, who was the winner or Rui? In detail, Xiangyang was also a mother, so Rui was a little better. When he returned home, the proud Lolita had already come over. She bounced out of the yard and asked, "Sir, where did you and Sister Rui go?" The little fellow stretched out her hand from Rui's arms and said vaguely, "Little mother?" Li Yi remembered that when he made the bet with Rui, the proud Lolita was the referee, so she was the one to announce the final result. The proud and pampered Lolita's eyes spun as she said, "But little Duaner didn't call out father or mother." "Sir, and big sister Rui didn't win?" Li Yi pinched her face and asked, "Neither of us won, so who won?" "If neither of us won, then of course the referee won." The proud Lolita said seriously, "So, sir, you have to promise me one thing." "What is it?" As soon as Li Yi said it, he felt that something was wrong. How could there be a referee in a match? However, the proud Lolita didn't give him a chance to change his words. She said with a smile, "I haven't thought about it yet. I'll tell you when I've thought about it." She seemed to be afraid that Li Yi would go back on his words, so she ran away quickly after saying that. Rui looked at him, smiled and said, "Since my husband didn't lose, then the agreement between me and my husband." Li Yi waved his hand and said righteously, "Lil mother is also a mother, so it's still my wife who wins." Walking on the street with the incognito eldest princess and looking at the orderly Jingdo, Li Yi turned his head and asked, how has the emperor been these 2 days? Xianxia shook her head and said, it's better than before, but I'm still resting in bed most of the time. Li didn't know how to continue this topic. The old emperor's health was deteriorating year by year. Even Li himself wasn't confident. A few carriages slowly approached from the front. Li and she moved back a little. Looking at the carriages slowly moving away, Li murmured, these carriages look a little familiar. Xianxia turned her head to look and said calmly, an envoy from the Qi kingdom. Li asked in surprise, why did the Qi kingdom send an envoy here again? From what he remembered, ever since the third prince of the Qi kingdom had caused a ruckus in the Jingdo, the envoy from the Qi kingdom had returned. Later on, the friction between the two countries intensified. Even now, there were still occasional disputes on the border. What was the purpose of the Qi kingdom sending an envoy here again at this time? To negotiate for peace. Xianxia looked at the bustling crowd in front of them and said, the emperor of the Qi kingdom is seriously ill. I'm afraid he doesn't have much time left. The eldest prince and the third prince of the Qi kingdom are locked in a fierce struggle for the throne. The court is also divided into two factions that are evenly matched. This time, the envoy from the Qi kingdom has come to the capital on behalf of the eldest prince to negotiate for peace with us. The eldest prince is the crown prince of the Qi kingdom. Even if the Qi kingdom doesn't value the eldest son as much as other countries, the eldest prince has, after all, entered the East Palace. He's the heir apparent in name. There's no lack of support in the court. Why would he need our help? At this delicate moment, the eldest prince had sent an envoy to negotiate for peace. Naturally, it wasn't just to negotiate for peace. It was likely that he wanted to borrow some power from the Jing kingdom to deal with the third prince. For the crown prince to end up like this, it was truly tragic. Xianxia glanced at him and said, originally it was indeed like this. Although the third prince of the Qi kingdom has a reputation for being virtuous, he's still the third prince. He doesn't have a legitimate title. However, not long ago the crown prince of the Qi kingdom turned the entire Qi kingdom into a mess. The people's grievances rose everywhere and the hearts of the people were shaken. Many in the court were disappointed in him and turned to support the third prince. That's why the two of them are evenly matched now. Seems there's such a thing. Li nodded and said, what did the court officials say? Xianxia shook her head and said, they only revealed their intention to negotiate for peace. They haven't formally proposed it yet. My imperial father's health isn't good. He hasn't summoned them these few days. I'm afraid they'll have to wait until my imperial father's next court session. Li didn't have much of an opinion on the matter of negotiating for peace. However, from this matter he could feel the changes in the Jing kingdom over the past 1 or 2 years. He could still remember when he first came to the capital. The carriage driven by the envoy of the Qi kingdom still dared to run amok on the busy streets of the capital. In just 2 short years, the envoy no longer had that kind of arrogance and despotism. He was even more restrained than some of the nobles in the capital. However, when he left the Qi kingdom, he didn't hear anything about the emperor of the Qi kingdom. Could it be that the saying Yinghua guards his heart was really true? It was just that the person Yinghua was guarding was not the old emperor, but the one in the Qi kingdom. He wasn't so free that he would even worry about the affairs of the Qi kingdom, so he didn't ask more. This time, the princess went out incognito to see the suffering of the people. At the same time, she also went home to get a meal and spar with Mississippi Lu. In the last few spars, Mississippi Lu had always been slightly better. She was usually busy with political affairs, so it was impossible for her to practice martial arts every day like Mississippi Lu. Occasionally she would spar with him. Perhaps she had even learned something from it and progressed quickly. Of course, in this way, the eldest princess had lost both in person and in spirit. Although compared to before, the gap between the two had shrunk a lot. After drinking too much soup, the effect was naturally not as obvious. In front of Mississippi Lu, it would be difficult for her to raise her chest in this lifetime. Xianxia casually pointed to the front and said, in front is the government office of the capital. Let's go in and take a look. Li nodded. He hadn't seen County Magistrate Lu for a long time. He didn't know if the hurdle in his heart had been crossed or not. You two, what grievances do you have? Don't be anxious. Speak one by one. Sitting in the hall, Jingdo Magistrate Lu Dao gently tapped the gavel and pointed to the two people below. An old man below replied, Sir, my daughter went to the river to wash clothes yesterday morning and has not returned yet. Hearing this, Lu Dao furrowed his brows and looked at the other person. He asked, what about you? Why did you report the case? The man's expression was sorrowful as he said, My lord, this commoner's wife returned to her parents' home 3 days ago and hasn't returned since. This morning this commoner went to her in-laws' home to inquire, but they said that they had never seen her. My lord, you must uphold justice for this commoner. 2 more have gone missing? Lu Daio's brows furrowed even more. In 1 month, there had been over 10 women who had mysteriously disappeared. He was about to open his mouth to ask more details when his eyes flickered and his body suddenly shook. He quickly walked out and bowed. Greetings, Your Highness Sir Li. Prime Minister Qin walked out of the door and said to an elegant young man, after you go back, help me bring a message to the Grand Tutor. Tell him that in 2 days I will come to visit him. I will certainly bring the message. Chu Ping bowed and said, I will remember Prime Minister Qin's teachings. I will take my leave today. Prime Minister Qin nodded and said, Qinyu, go see Chu Ping off. Qinyu walked forward and extended his hand. Brother Chu, please. Chu Ping looked at him and smiled. Thank you, Brother Qinyu. Chu Ping walked first and Qinyu followed behind him. His footsteps were very slow because the young man in front of him seemed to have trouble moving his feet. His steps were deep and shallow and his pace was also very slow. Prime Minister Qin watched the 2 of them leave and slightly shook his head. The 2 of them were of the same age, but one of them spent all day visiting the great scholars and learned scholars in the capital, seeking knowledge and dispelling doubts. The other person was a playboy that everyone in the capital hated. In the garden, the large man glanced outside and asked, Who is that person? These past few months, he has been coming to our house every few days. The successor of Grand Tutor Chu. He is thirsty for knowledge and is indeed different from those playboys. The middle-aged man's gaze looked in the direction that the young man disappeared in and slowly said. The large man nodded and said, He looks all right, but his legs are not very nimble. The middle-aged man's gaze was still looking in that direction. After a long time, he withdrew his gaze and looked at the large man. You've been by my side for 2 years? The large man scratched his head and said, I forgot, but it seems so. 2 years is not a short time. The middle-aged man sighed and stood up. He looked at the large man and said, There is an important matter that I need you to do. The large man revealed a puzzled expression. What is it? The middle-aged man waved his hand and the large man moved his ear closer. Fifth Master, don't worry. Leave this matter to me. There will be no problem. After a moment, the large man's face revealed an excited expression. After patting his chest, he quickly left. The middle-aged man watched him leave. After a long time he sat down again and took a sip of tea. He muttered, It has already been 2 years. Chapter 879. In the Yamen, Emingzi frowned and asked, Within a month there have been more than a dozen cases of women and girls going missing near the capital? Lu Daio nodded and said, Since the first case a month ago, including the 2 today, there have been 13 cases. The security in the capital had always been good, and there were countless heroes of the martial arts world among the people. There were very few major cases. After the first few cases of women going missing, he didn't pay too much attention. But now there were a total of 13 cases. As a small magistrate of the capital, he would soon be unable to handle it. Although the court had repeatedly banned the trafficking of women and children, there were still people who dared to do it under the feet of the Emperor of Jingdo. Li Mingzhu looked at the 2 people in the hall, whose faces were full of sorrow, and turned her head to ask, Have you found any clues? Lu Daio shook his head and said, I have sent people to investigate many places, and even had the constables stand guard at night. But the thief is very careful and doesn't commit the crime in the same place. Until now there have been no clues. What did Lu Yizhi say? Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, Has the case been submitted to the Ministry of Justice? Lu Daio shook his head again. Assistant Minister Lu is busy with work and has a few major cases on hand. I think that if it is not necessary, it is better not to give him trouble. Li Yi nodded and waved his hand, Go and bring the files of these cases over. Hearing this, Lu Daio was delighted. He had already seen official Li's ability when he was in Qin and Prefecture. Seeing that the advisor next to him was still in a daze, he kicked him and hurriedly said, Hurry and bring those files over. Then he looked at Li Yi and Zhang, eldest princess, and said, Your Highness, official Li, please go to the back hall. In the back hall of the Yamen, Emingzi saw Li Yi flipping through the files without saying a word. She couldn't help but ask, Did you find anything? Don't worry. Do you think I'm the reincarnation of Lord Bao? Li Yi flipped through the files and turned his head. Lord Lu, please bring me a map of the vicinity of the capital. County Magistrate Lu was more reliable and didn't have as many questions as Princess Royal. Without saying anything, he quickly asked someone to take out a detailed map. February 13th, Yang Village. Li looked back at County Magistrate Lu and asked, "Where is Yang Village?" County Magistrate Lu casually pointed to a place above, and Li drew a circle at that location. Li flipped open another scroll. 16th of February, Wei Village. "Where is Wei Village?" County Magistrate Lu pointed. "Here." At this moment he had already understood Li's meaning. Even if he didn't know what Li was going to do, he still took the initiative to mark the locations of the missing women on those files. Seeing Li begin to connect those marked small circles with lines, a big net immediately appeared on the map. After that, County Magistrate Lu circled the place with the densest lines on the net. If he still didn't understand what Li was doing, he wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of the magistrate of the capital for so long. With admiration on his face, he immediately bowed and said, "Thank you for your advice, Official Li." Li put down the pen, waved his hand, pointed at the big circle drawn at the end and said, "Send people to visit this place secretly. Be careful not to be discovered and alert the enemy. If you find something, don't act rashly. These people have committed crimes repeatedly without being discovered, so they can't be ordinary people. At that time, the Secret Intelligence Office will cooperate with you." Since he had encountered this matter, he could only do it conveniently. That was all he could do. Walking out of the county government, the eldest princess shook her head and said, "There are people who are so bold in the territory of the emperor. If we are far away from the capital, I don't know how chaotic it will be. Where there are people, there are evil. The great harmony of the world is just an ideal. It's already amazing to make the world seem peaceful on the surface." Li turned his head to look at her and said, "Miss, work hard." There was no obvious change in the expression on Mingzhu's face. When he sent her to the gate of the palace, he suddenly said, "Don't forget what day it is the day after tomorrow." "What day is the day after tomorrow?" Li's heart skipped a beat. He, who had been traumatized by this, couldn't help but tremble when he heard similar words again. Last time, Mississippi Lu told him not to forget what day it was 7 days later. He racked his brains but couldn't remember it. It was not Rui's birthday, not her birthday, not Xuanhuan's birthday, and not even the 3rd anniversary of their meeting. He had been on tenterhooks for a whole day. He used a roundabout strategy to ask Xuanhuan and found out that his birthday was 7 days later. He had been very depressed about this. How could there be such a strange question in the world? He asked tentatively, "Is it 2 years, 7 months, and how many days?" Seeing that the expression on her face became confused, he immediately changed his words. "No, that's your birthday. No, your birthday just passed." Seeing her frown, a light flashed in Li's mind. He suddenly said, "I remember. The day after tomorrow is the first day of your menstruation. Remember to drink more water and rest more. Don't get tired. Put aside the affairs of the court for now and let the people below do it." Mingzi looked at him and said calmly, "The day after tomorrow is the first day of the first day." Li thought for a while and said with certainty, "Last month was also the first day of the first day." Mingzi said lightly, "On the first day of the first day, you have to go to the morning court. Father specially said that there is only one morning court every month. You won't die if you get up 2 hours earlier." Li just remembered that in the past few months, if the old emperor was not so sick that he couldn't get out of bed, he would still go to the morning court in person on the first day of the month. "Oh, I see. I have to go to the morning court on the first day of the month." Li nodded. When he turned to walk back, he turned back and said, "However, you still have to remember to rest more." In a room of the Qin family, the big man said apologetically, "Fifth Lord, I'm sorry. I can't do that." The middle-aged man looked up at her and asked, "Why?" The big man sighed and said helplessly, "That girl was taken away by the yamen. I don't dare to stop the people from the yamen." The middle-aged man stood up and asked slowly, "Which yamen?" "The capital magistrate's office." The big man said angrily, "The people from the capital magistrate's office are too despicable. That girl's sister died some time ago, and she went to the yamen to complain. She was arrested and locked up for 2 months. She was only released for 4 hours and then she was taken back again. They said that she stole something from the magistrate. Isn't this nonsense?" "Fifth Lord, I'm sorry, I couldn't protect her. She stole something from the magistrate and was arrested again?" The middle-aged man murmured and sat down slowly. After a long time, he waved his hand and said, "It's okay, it's not your fault." The big man asked curiously, "Fifth Lord, who is the girl you asked me to protect?" The middle-aged man sighed and said, "She is a pitiful person." The big man nodded repeatedly, "She's quite pitiful. Why don't those officials have any sympathy? The middle-aged man waved his hand casually. You can leave first. The big man responded, retreated to the door and closed it. The middle-aged man lowered his head. After a long time, a smile appeared on his face and he murmured, Sing Shichen, Sing Shichen. Chapter 880. The morning court of the Jing kingdom had long been reduced to a mere formality. There were 3 provinces and 6 ministries to maintain the operation of the imperial court. In fact, there was no need for an emperor. Some important decisions could not be decided by the subordinates, and the eldest princess would be the judge. If even the eldest princess could not make a decision, she would have to ask the old emperor for his opinion. On the first day of every month, the ceremonial morning court would be held. If there was nothing very important, the old emperor would only show up for a short while. Her Highness the princess, who assisted the government, sat on the lower left side of the old emperor to distinguish her status. But now, the position where Li Yi stood in the court could no longer be leaned against the pillar. His position was only behind the 2 prime ministers, and was equal to the ministers of the 6 ministries. Listening to the reports of the officials in the court, Lin Mingya felt a little sleepy. Suddenly, he heard the sharp and thin voice of a eunuch. Summon the envoy of the Qi kingdom for an audience. These days, the envoy of the Qi kingdom had been very well behaved in the capital city. He was so well behaved that he did not seem to be the envoy of the Qi kingdom. But according to the rumors they revealed, this time they came to seek peace. It was normal for them to be well behaved. The envoy of the Qi kingdom stepped into the main hall. After standing still, he bowed and said in a loud voice, Greetings, Your Majesty. The envoy of the Qi kingdom had a proper attitude and a humble expression, which made the officials of the Jing kingdom feel refreshed. Because of the great power of the Qi kingdom, even when the envoy was sent in the past, his attitude was extremely arrogant in the presence of the emperor and ministers of the Jing kingdom. Compared with his attitude now, it was like the difference between cloud and mud. And the reason for all these changes was very clear in their hearts. The Qi kingdom and the Zhao kingdom had repeatedly invaded the border. Each time they were beaten back by the generals and soldiers of the Jing kingdom. After losing several cities, the Zhao kingdom finally calmed down and quietly retreated. The envoy who was sent to discuss the redemption of those cities was still hanging in the office of the Chamberlain of Dependencies. The envoys of the Qi kingdom got straight to the point. After a few ceremonial words they went straight to the point. The gist of it was that the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom were neighbors. How many people would die and how much money would be wasted if they were to fight each other all the time? How much money would be wasted? How about the 2 kingdoms shake hands and make peace from now on? They would respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity, not invade each other's territory, and not interfere with each other's internal affairs? They would be equal and mutually beneficial, and they would coexist peacefully. As soon as he said this, not only did Emperor Jing stand up from his throne, but the court was also in an uproar. The biggest foreign threat of the Jing kingdom was the Qi kingdom. The 2 kingdoms had been fighting for decades, and the Jing kingdom was the weaker one. Over the past decades, the Qi kingdom had asked for peace several times, paying a heavy price for it. This time, it was the Qi kingdom's turn to ask for peace. This was the first time. As the subjects of the Jing kingdom, their hearts were filled with a sense of belonging and pride. Had the Jing kingdom of today grown to the point that even the Qi kingdom dared not underestimate it? Without waiting for the subjects of the Jing kingdom to say anything, the leader of the envoys bowed and stepped forward. He said in a loud voice, To show our sincerity, on behalf of the crown prince of the Qi kingdom, we ask His Majesty the Emperor to marry the eldest princess of your kingdom. We also promise that after the crown prince ascends to the throne, we will immediately confer the title of imperial concubine to Her Highness. As soon as he said this, the court, which had been a little noisy, immediately quieted down. Someone was startled for a moment, then frowned. Some people were stunned at first, and then their faces showed a look of wild joy. Li Yi looked at the envoy who was holding the letter of credence from the Qi kingdom, then raised his head to look up. The old emperor frowned. Her Highness the princess was expressionless. She retracted her gaze, and there was not much change in her expression. Someone immediately stepped forward and said bluntly, Your Majesty, we can negotiate for peace, but the crown prince of the Qi kingdom must never marry the eldest princess. I second the motion. I second the motion. As soon as Prime Minister Qin said this, many people in the court stepped forward. The Qi kingdom taking the initiative to negotiate for peace was, of course, a very honorable thing to do. If word of this got out, it would raise the prestige of the kingdom. But for the crown prince of the Qi kingdom to marry the eldest princess, it would be a fool's dream. The importance of Her Highness the Princess to the Jing Kingdom was self-evident. It could even be said that although she was a princess, she played the role of a monarch. Moreover, she was a wise monarch that was rarely seen in decades. Without Her Highness the Princess, what would become of the imperial court of the Jing Kingdom? Normal people would not do such a thing to give such a wise monarch to the Qi Kingdom for nothing. As for negotiating for peace, the Qi Kingdom did not want to discuss it. After all, they could not defeat the soldiers of the Jing Kingdom who had celestial punishment. In short, peace could not be discussed, but marrying the princess was out of the question. Cui Qingming looked at the old man who stepped forward. His expression was calm, but his fists were tightly clenched in his sleeves. He tilted his head to look, and an official stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, if the two countries go to war, how many people will be plunged into misery and suffering? How many brave soldiers of the Jing Kingdom will be sacrificed? Now that the Qi Kingdom has proposed to negotiate for peace, it is a blessing for the people. I hope that your Majesty will reconsider." After this official spoke, many people stepped forward to agree. Both sides stuck to their own views and argued endlessly. Emperor Jing put down the letter of credence and pressed his hand down. The imperial court immediately returned to silence. "We can negotiate for peace, but don't mention the marriage proposal again," he said plainly, showing his most obvious attitude. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom raised his head and said, "Negotiating for peace is a matter that benefits both countries. The Qi Kingdom has shown enough sincerity. Your country should also show some sincerity, right?" As soon as he said this, all the officials in the imperial court looked at the envoy of the Qi Kingdom with unfriendly gazes. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom was implying that if the Jing Kingdom did not marry the eldest princess to the Jing Kingdom and did not show enough sincerity, then there was no need to discuss the peace. "Your Majesty, this matter is beneficial to the people. Please reconsider. Your Majesty, don't let the people be plunged into misery and suffering again. Your Majesty, please think of the people of the Jing Kingdom and the soldiers at the front line." When a few more people stepped forward, Emperor Jing frowned and looked at a certain place below. Li stepped forward at the right time and looked at those people. He asked, "Accepting the Qi Kingdom's negotiation for peace and marrying the eldest princess to the Jing Kingdom is to save millions of people and prevent the people from being plunged into misery and suffering?" The leader of the group scoffed coldly and said, "If it can prevent the war between the two countries, why not? Then, in the end, can it be avoided?" Li looked at him and then at the people around him. He asked again, "The Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom have negotiated for peace so many times. Did they really achieve what this lord said?" The official was speechless. If negotiating for peace was really useful, it would have been enough to negotiate for peace once. The envoy of the Qi Kingdom would not have appeared in the hall now. Li looked at the courtiers in the hall and said, "Everyone knows that the Qi Kingdom has the heart of a tiger and a wolf. They have abandoned the treaty more than once. What credibility do they have? Moreover, your Majesty is ill and the eldest princess is assisting you in ruling the country. This is a critical time. How can you marry the Qi Kingdom? Moreover, the crown prince of the Qi Kingdom has lost the support of the people and may not even be able to sit on the throne. What right do you have to make such a promise?" "Haha, you're right. Old General Shui laughed and walked out. He said, "Sincerity? What sincerity do you want? Do you want Tianfa?" Another old general walked out and laughed. He said, "The Qi Kingdom is the invader. What's there to talk about negotiating for peace? If you want to retreat, do it quickly. If you want to fight, the soldiers of the Jing Kingdom will not be afraid of you." Prime Minister Shen stood out and nodded. He said, "Your Majesty, I think Dr. Li is right." The Minister of War Yanbing stepped forward and said, "I agree." The Minister of Revenue Xuanhuan stood beside him. "I agree." The Minister of Left Minister Dong Wenyun. Those who stepped forward were all important courtiers in the imperial court. The two prime ministers had the same opinion. The Shen family and the Wang family were also standing behind Jinzi Guanglu. The opinions of others were actually insignificant. Cui Qingming looked at the row of people standing in front of him. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. Soon he loosened his fists helplessly. Regarding the negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi Kingdom, the opinions of the big shots in the imperial court were unanimous. Peace could be negotiated, but marrying the eldest princess was out of the question. If it worked, they could negotiate. If it didn't work, they could get out. The Qi Kingdom was still the Qi Kingdom of the past. But the Jing Kingdom was no longer the weak Jing Kingdom of the past. Li ate a mouthful of egg-fried rice. He looked at the eldest princess and said, "You are right. The negotiation for peace with the envoy of the Qi kingdom is fake. They want to use this opportunity to get the help of the Jing kingdom to help the eldest prince ascend the throne." Emingzu held the wine cup, but she didn't eat. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. She looked at him and asked, "What do you think about the peace marriage?" Li Yi thought for a while and said, "Peace marriage? Discord is moral integrity. Peace is also a diplomatic method. As for how I think about it, it can't be generalized. This is what you usually use to fool father." Emingzu swirled the wine cup and said, "I want to listen to your heart." Heart. Li Yi raised his wine cup and clinked it with her. He said without hesitation, "I don't care if it's the Qi kingdom or the Zhao kingdom. Of course, I won't let you marry them." That you're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.